Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Diana Padierna, and I am the Executive Director at Landlord Self-Help Center. We're excited to resume our Landlord Lunch and Learn series. So I'll start with a few housekeeping reminders before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Landlord Self-Help Center website if you would like to rewatch it. The Q&A feature is enabled, and you're welcome to submit questions related to this webinar. These questions will be addressed during the Q&A period at the end. Please note that our presenters will be answering only questions related to today's presentation. If you have questions about your own specific situation, please contact our office during our business hours. So let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Landlord Self-Help Center's Landlord Lunch and Learn session. My name is Ashley and I am a community legal worker and licensed paralegal. My colleague Catherine is also going to be presenting today. The Landlord Self-Help Center is a community legal clinic funded by Legal Aid Ontario. Landlord Self-Help Center was founded in 1975 and incorporated in 1977. We have a province-wide mandate to support the small-scale landlord community. Approximately 80% of the Landlord Self-Help Center's resources are dedicated to direct client services. This Landlord Lunch and Learn session will focus on before you rent, screening, human rights, rental applications, verifying employments, landlord references, and more. The information offered in this presentation is intended as general information. It is not legal advice. At the Landlord Self-Help Center, we acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. As a community legal clinic funded by Legal Aid Ontario with a province-wide mandate, we acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario, and we make this acknowledgement in support of the necessary work of reconciliation. Residential Tenancies Act. The Residential Tenancies Act is the Ontario legislation that governs residential tenancies and matters related to renting in Ontario. The legislation is drafted by the provincial government and voted on by MPPs, members of provincial parliament. The Residential Tenancies Act establishes laws for landlord and tenant obligations, rent increases, and the grounds for termination of tenancies. Section 1 of the Residential Tenancies Act states the purpose of this act are to provide protection for residential tenants from unlawful rent increases and unlawful evictions, to establish a framework for the regulation of residential rents, to balance the rights and responsibilities of residential landlords and tenants, and to provide for the adjudication of disputes and other processes to informally resolve disputes. The Residential Tenancies Act contains nearly all of the rules that a landlord will need to know when renting out a property. Before you rent, you should definitely familiarize yourself with the Landlord and Tenant Board and Residential Tenancies Act. Residential Tenancies Act, Section 20. Section 20 of the Residential Tenancies Act states, a landlord is responsible for providing and maintaining a residential complex, including the rental units in it, in a good state of repair and fit for habitation and for complying with health, safety, housing, and maintenance standards. This applies even if the tenant was aware of a state of non-repair or a contravention of a standard before entering into the tenancy agreement. The Ontario Building Code. It is important to know when the building was constructed and under which version of the Ontario Building Code it resides. This code provides a standard to which the building was built. Those minimum standards must be maintained and/or upgraded to meet the Ontario Fire Code. Each type of occupancy must meet the municipality's zoning and property standard bylaws and may require a license and different building requirements for fire safety. The 2024 building code came into effect on January 1st, 2025, with a 3 months grace period until March 31st, 2025 for certain designs that are already underway. This replaces the 2012 building code. If you're looking for more information on the building code and updates, you can visit ontario.ca/page/building code updates. Fire code. It is the landlord's responsibility to keep things maintained and ensure the building complies with the Ontario Fire Code. There is zero tolerance in Ontario for fire code violations, for which a landlord can be fined immediately. Fines for not having proper fire code maintenance requirements can be up to $50,000 and/or a year of imprisonment. A corporation convicted of a fire code offense is liable for a fine of up to $100,000. For more information on the Ontario Fire Code, you can visit oafc.on.ca, which is the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs. Second suites. Second suites are an important part of Ontario's rental housing landscape. They offer affordable housing solutions throughout the province. Second suites are self-contained residential units, which are generally allowed in single detached, semi-detached, and row houses. They are also in ancillary structures. Examples include garages, laneway houses, or garden suites. If you have created or are looking to create a second suite, we have a website with several guides and important information. This website can be found at secondsuites.info. On that website, we have several guides, the first of which is your financial considerations, an information guide for homeowners thinking about adding a second suite. This guide will provide an overview of financial gains and risks. Our second guide is Creating a Second Suite, an information guide for homeowners. This has information on the process and fire, electrical, building, and property standard requirements for owners creating a second suite. The other guide available on our website is Operating a Second Suite, an informative guide for homeowners. This guide has information on tenant screening, tenancy agreements, termination of a tenancy, and landlord's rights and responsibilities for owners operating a second suite. We also have an interactive map that will help you locate information for setting up a second suite in your area. This map has local fire safety requirements, your nearest building department, and the local zoning and planning department available. You can find this again on the website, which is secondsuites.info. Human Rights Code. The Ontario Human Rights Code also impacts landlord and tenant relationships, as it establishes the following. Every person has the right to equal treatment with respect to the occupancy of accommodation without discrimination because of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, age, marital status, family status, disability, or the receipt of public assistance. For more information, you can visit our website at landlordselfhelp.com/human rights and rental housing. Human Rights Code. A regulation to the Human Rights Code, OReg 290/98, business practices permissible to landlords in selecting prospective tenants for residential accommodation. This OReg sets out the best practices permissible to landlords. Rental history, credit references, and/or credit checks may be requested. A lack of rental or credit history should not be viewed negatively. A landlord can ask for income information, but they must also ask for and consider together any available information on rental history, credit references, and credit checks, such as through Equifax Canada. Income information can only be considered on its own when no other information is made available. Income information should be limited to confirming that the person has enough income to cover the rent. Housing providers can also ask for a guarantor to sign the lease, but only if the landlord has the same requirement for all tenants, not just for people identified by code grounds, such as recent immigrants or people receiving social assistance. Just to clarify there, a guarantor does not sign the lease agreement, but can be put onto the rental application.
Setting the rent price. When setting the rent price, landlords should keep in mind two things. First, being that there are rules around rent increases, and second, being the current rental market rates. Section 110 of the Residential Tenancies Act states, no landlord shall increase the rent charged to a tenant for a rental unit except in accordance with this part. Under the Residential Tenancies Act, Section 113 states, the lawful rent for the first rental period for a new tenant under a new tenancy agreement is the rent first charged to the tenant. Essentially, there are no rules around a minimum or maximum rent price a landlord can charge for a new tenant or a new unit. This term is often referred to as vacancy decontrol. However, once the rent price is set, the landlord is only permitted to increase the rent every 12 months. This is in section 119, which states, a landlord who is lawfully entitled to increase the rent charged to a tenant for a rental unit may do so only if at least 12 months has lapsed. Section 120 states, no landlord may increase the rent charged to a tenant or to an assignee under Section 95 during the term of their tenancy or by more than a guideline, except in accordance with Section 126 or 127 or an agreement under Section 121 or 120. The guideline increase is established by the province to reflect inflation for that year and is capped at 2.5%. Since 2023, the province has set the annual guideline increase to the cap of 2.5%. However, in 2022, the guideline increase was only 1.2%. For more information about the provincial rent increase guidelines, you can visit ontario.ca/page/residential rent increases. Section 6.1 of the RTA provides exemptions to the rent increases. For example, new buildings, additions to existing buildings, and most new basement apartments that are occupied for the first time for residential purposes after November 15th, 2018. If you are unsure if your unit is exempt, please seek independent legal advice. Since there are rules for rent increases, landlords are encouraged to set the rent price to reflect what the market can bear. Landlords are encouraged to do their own research to determine what similar units in their area are listed for. Just like upgrades and features can increase the value of your home, these things should be taken into consideration while setting your rent price. Tenants will see value in features like dishwashers, parking, in-suite laundry, and outdoor space. Do not set the rent price based on the number of occupants, and take into consideration that a tenant does not need permission to bring in a roommate or a significant other. Advertising the rental unit. As my colleague Ashley discussed previously in this presentation regarding the Human Rights Code and how it applies to landlord and tenants, landlords should refrain from any discriminatory language in their rental listing. Common discriminatory language used in ads are lines like single occupancy only or no kids. This would discriminate on the basis of family status or marital status. It is common for ads to also include words like preference will be given to a working professional or working professionals only. This could potentially be discrimination on the basis of age or disability or people on government assistance. There are certain exemptions like female-only rooming houses. However, if this type of exemption does not apply, landlords should not include language like female only or mention any other protected grounds such as religion, sexual orientation, race, etc. Although landlords can not discriminate while selecting tenants, they do have the ability to choose how and where they advertise their rental unit. Landlords should take into consideration the type of tenants they want and how they're going to reach these prospective tenants, which is essentially your target market. Nowadays, there are a variety of online marketplaces that allow landlords to advertise their rental unit free of charge. There are also websites that landlords can pay to post their ad or other services like hiring a realtor. Landlords can also take advantage of opportunities in their community to reach their ideal tenant prospective market. For example, many tenants prefer to rent to students and take advantage of their local college or university housing advertisement services. What a landlord puts in the context of an advertisement is critical. The better the ad, the more prospective tenants a landlord will get to choose from. Landlords should include any additional features the unit has, highlight nearby attractions and conveniences to that area, and landlords should also be cautious not to oversell the unit or include anything that might be misleading. On the screen is a real-life example of an online advertisement for a unit in Toronto. I've highlighted certain areas for comment. Newly renovated, new kitchen and bathroom. This is ambiguous. If it's brand new renovation, include that it's brand new in your ad. If the renovation was completed in 2020, maybe change the verbiage to say something like recently renovated or renovated in 2020. Third floor loft, very large room, 16 by 14 feet with window and a large walk-in closet. Loft space is a unique feature to this rental. Including measurements is a great way to highlight and explain the space. Laundry is off-site, 3 to 5 minute walk, 3 options, street parking only. This is good verbiage. It does not mislead any prospective tenant to thinking that parking or laundry is included in the rent or is a part of the rental complex, but it does explain that there are very convenient alternatives. Perfect for professional couple or 2 roommates. This is problematic. As discussed earlier about discrimination, this is discriminatory. Also, this could discourage prospective tenants who are single or retired not to respond to the ad, limiting the amount of people who are interested in your unit. The last comment, all amenities very nearby, walking distance to Loblaws, Farm Boy, Fiesta Farms, etc. This is a great example of highlighting nearby attractions and conveniences. Showing the rental unit. The Residential Tenancies Act outlines when when a landlord can enter a rental unit with or without notice. Section 26, subsection 3 states a landlord may enter the rental unit without written notice to show the unit to a prospective tenant if the landlord and tenant have agreed that the tenancy will be terminated or one of them has given notice of termination to the other. The landlord enters between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And before entering, the landlord informs or makes a reasonable effort to inform the tenant of their intention to do so. If your unit still has current tenants in it, landlords are encouraged to be mindful of their current tenants. Although the Residential Tenancies Act does give landlords the ability to show the unit without their tenant's approval, it is recommended to try to work with your tenants to arrange for showings on days or times that is convenient to them. If possible, arranging multiple showings during a specific time window is best practice, and it's also the most convenient for landlords. Rental applications. Landlords are encouraged to use a rental application. This ensures the same information is collected from all prospective tenants. The rental application is not a lease agreement, but should outline, if selected, what that prospective tenant is agreeing to enter into as basic terms, such as the move-in date, rent price, what utilities and services are included. This can avoid any confusion when preparing the standard form of lease. A rental application allows landlords to collect additional information from the prospective tenant, such as income source information, their current or previous landlord information, personal references, and banking information. It is important to make sure that the application is in compliance with the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. Rental applications should include clauses such as the tenant certifies that the information is current and correct. The landlord agrees to keep the supporting information confidential. The tenant gives consent to the landlord to contact employers, previous and current landlords, and personal references. The tenant consents to the landlord's disclosure of any information for the purposes of credit reporting or other financial reasons. It is important to note that the landlord is not allowed to access the tenant's confidential credit information unless the prospective tenant provides written consent to allowing a credit check. Landlords should always be mindful of the Human Rights Code. As such, applications should not include questions about protected grounds such as gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, creed, race, ethnicity, disabilities, etc. Unlike other prescribed landlord-tenant board forms and the standard form of lease, Ontario has not created a government-approved rental application. However, the Landlord Self-Help Center has prepared one. It's our own version of the rental application. And if you're interested in using it, it can be found on our members lounge portion of our website. I have a screenshot of that application now to show you examples of what it looks like. And I'd like to point out that although landlords cannot discriminate on the basis of family status, landlords should be requesting that prospective tenants include all occupants on the rental application. This includes children. Our application clearly outlines the rent price, services included, and the date the rental term begins. On the screen now, you'll see a portion of the information section from our rental application. The information asked is quite standard, and of course, none of the questions are regarding information that is related to a protected ground under the Human Rights Code. Tenant screening. Tenant screening is the process of collecting and reviewing documents and verifying information from prospective tenants. Having a vigorous screening process is the best practice to ensure you select the right candidate. The Residential Tenancies Act does not set rules of how this process is done. However, it does state in Section 10 that in selecting prospective tenants, landlords may use, in the manner described in the regulations made under the Human Rights Code, income information, credit checks, credit references, rental history, guarantees, and other similar business practices as prescribed in those regulations. I'm now going to pass it back to my colleague Ashley to provide you some tips on each different screening process.
Employment verification. It is extremely important that landlords not only collect employment or source of income information from prospective tenants, but also that they verify it. A landlord can verify much of the information themselves by double checking names and addresses on the internet. You can use Canada 411 for this. reviewing pay stubs, employment confirmation letters, and checking LinkedIn profiles. Although LinkedIn may not be a reliable source of information, as it is updated solely by the person who has the account. You may wish to call the employer listed to confirm that both pay stub and/or employment confirmation letters are legitimate. A landlord can also contact the individuals listed on the rental applications as employers. They can personally visit the employer. This may be necessary in some instances when there's a discrepancy between telephone numbers and addresses listed. Should a landlord need to garnish or collect in the future, knowing the tenant's employer is very important. Landlord references. A landlord can request a reference from past landlords for any prospective tenant. A landlord can ask for a landlord reference letter. They can also ask for past rent receipts. A landlord can reach out to a landlord reference to verify the dates lived in the rental units and the accuracy of the rent receipts provided. A landlord can also verify these references by double-checking names and addresses on the internet by again using Canada 411. They can contact the individuals listed on the rental application as landlord references to confirm. And again, in some instances, personally visiting the former landlord may be necessary if there's a discrepancy in telephone numbers or addresses. Third-party resources. Many third-party search opportunities are available for landlords to utilize in the tenant screening process. A landlord can request a copy of photo ID, such as a driver's license or a passport. A landlord may use a credit checking service or have the tenant provide credit reports. Be aware that fraudulent reports can be provided and do your due diligence to ensure the accuracy of any reports that you've gotten directly from your prospective tenant. You can search for past landlord and tenant board orders on various websites, including the Canadian Legal Information Institute. Their website is canle.org. The Landlord Self-Help Center does not warrant the services of or accept any responsibility for the services provided by Rent Check Corp., Renting Made Easy, Equifax, TransUnion, Tenant Verification Service, Single Key, or TenCheck. Why screening is important. It is not enough for the landlord to only collect information from prospective tenants, but it is extremely important that the landlords verify the information that has been provided on the application before signing a lease and before providing access to the rental unit. Once a tenant has access to the rental unit, a tenancy has been created and the tenant has protections under the Residential Tenancies Act. If a tenant was not truthful on an application, a landlord cannot unilaterally terminate the tenancy in the future once that's discovered. That's why it is very important for a landlord to screen potential tenants before the tenancy commences. Termination only in accordance with the Act. Section 37(1) of the Residential Tenancies Act states a tenancy may be terminated only in accordance with the Act. If you want to ask a tenant to leave, you must have a valid reason as defined in the Residential Tenancies Act. Valid reasons include non-payment of rent, damages, interference with enjoyment, own use, persistently rate rent, demolition or conversion. Repairs or renovations may provide the tenant with the opportunity of right of first refusal.
Municipal bylaws. As Ashley mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, landlords are required to make sure that their unit meets all provincial standards, such as the Ontario Building Code and the Fire Code. In addition to that, landlords should familiarize themselves with local municipal bylaws. Many cities have bylaws that create additional property standards that go above and beyond what is stated in the Residential Tenancies Act, the Building Code, or the Fire Code. For some examples, Toronto's bylaw states that all air conditioning systems shall be operated from June 2nd to September 14th so as to maintain an indoor temperature of not more than 26 degrees Celsius. Mississauga bylaw states that all balconies shall be kept clear of accumulations of unsightly material or objects. Brampton's bylaw states that no person shall permit a person to occupy for sleeping purposes any cellar or space used as a lobby, hallway, closet, bathroom, laundry, stairway, kitchen, or any accessory building or shed unless otherwise permitted. Oakville's bylaw states that no person shall occupy or permit the occupancy of a building or portion thereof where an extensive accumulation of mold exists which could pose a health concern. Waterloo's bylaw states that every rental unit shall contain at least the following: A, a toilet, B, a kitchen sink, C, a wash basin, and D, a bathtub or shower. You'll notice on the PowerPoint, I have included the websites for the cities I have mentioned. If your city is not listed, you should be able to find the bylaws by searching your city's name and property standard bylaws. You may also contact your city or municipality to request a copy of the bylaws. Landlord licensing. In addition to property standard bylaws, many cities have landlord licensing programs. These programs are an attempt to improve rental housing conditions by ensuring properties meet essential safety and maintenance standards and often require landlords to pay a fee. Some examples are Brampton, where a license is required in wards 1, 3, 4, and 7 for rental housing or buildings that have 4 or less units. Hamilton, licenses are required in wards 1, 8, and a part of ward 14 for rental housing units or buildings with 5 or less units. In Oshawa, the licensing requirement is for rental properties anywhere near Durham College or Ontario Tech University. Rooming house bylaws. Different municipalities and cities have laws for operating units where rooms are rented to individuals. These are referred to as rooming houses, lodging houses, or multi-tenant houses. Some examples include North Bay, where properties with 3 to 5 rental bedrooms are required to have a license. In North Bay, there's also a limit of 5 rooms per rooming house. In Ottawa, owners of a property that contain at least 4 rooming units are required to have a license. In Kitchener, licenses are required where 5 or more persons, not including the residential owner of the property, rent a lodging unit and the kitchen and other areas of the dwelling are shared. In Toronto, owners of a property that contain at least 4 rooming units are also required to have a license. For anybody who's interested in more information about the topic of before you rent, the Landlord Self-Help Center has a number of resources available. First with our website, which is landlordselfhelp.com, where you can find our RTA fact sheet specifically about before you rent and rent rules. We have our sound advice podcast and landlord learning module about tenant screening, and a number of other landlord learning videos that are specific to the topic of before you rent. We have our Facebook page, which is Landlord Self-Help. We also have a YouTube channel where previous Lunch and Learns videos are uploaded to. And we have our Instagram, which is @Landlord Self-Help. You'll notice all of the links on the screen there if anyone is interested in looking up our resources after this webinar. That concludes the presentation portion of today's webinar. We will be having another one on June 24th at 1 p.m., which is going to discuss everything about beginning a tenancy. Essentially, it picks up where this webinar leaves off. We'll discuss things like signing the lease agreement, additional lease terms, inspection report, last month's rent, and key deposits and before and after pictures. Then on October 22nd, we'll be back again to take a deep dive into understanding the N5. That brings us to our question and answer period of the presentation, and I will let Diana take it over from here.
Thank you so much, Catherine and Ashley, for the presentation. We had received a couple of questions. I'll go over in order to give our attendees some time to formulate their questions. So somebody had sent in a question asking, what if they have just a bachelor unit and that's how they want to advertise it? Can the landlord say in the ad, suitable for one person? Maybe Catherine, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I would personally avoid that type of verbiage in your advertisement. Just again, going back to the reasons of discrimination in the Human Rights Code. However, if the landlord has multiple applicants, the landlord is able to select who they think is best suited for the unit. Just one, thing on this though, it is important for landlords to keep in mind that once somebody enters into a lease agreement, they are allowed to still move in, an additional roommate or a significant other.
Thank you. Somebody else had sent in the following question. I know under the RTA, tenants are allowed to have pets, but can I advertise my unit as pet free? Maybe Catherine, do you want to give it
Yeah,
a try?
sure. No pets are really common in rental ads. It's not a violation of the Human Rights Code unless the prospective tenant, has a service animal. So certainly landlords are allowed to advertise their units, as no pets. Again, landlords should be aware that if the tenant moves in and then moves in a pet afterwards, the RTA is quite clear tenants are allowed to have pets as long as they're not causing damage or interference with the building or other tenants in the building.
Thank you. We received the following question. I entered into a lease agreement with a tenant and his mother agreed to be a guarantor, but I'm not clear whether the guarantor has to be named on the lease. Can you explain how this should be done? Maybe Ashley, do you want to
Yeah.
give it a shot?
Yeah, so a guarantor is a person that guarantees the rent on behalf of the tenant. So the guarantor should not be named as a tenant on the lease since they don't have the right to occupy the rental unit within the meaning of the Residential Tenancies Act. Both parties should be signing a separate guarantor agreement that's attached to the lease. Typically, a guarantor wouldn't get involved at the landlord and tenant board stage. It would be after when you're going to enforce through like a small claims court action that you would pursue the guarantor based on the agreement that was signed.
Okay. Somebody else had said, I recently found out that the tenant I rented to has another person live in the unit with them. No one else was listed on the lease or tenant application. What can I do? Ashley, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so that's why it's so important to do screening and verifying up front. There's nothing that a landlord can do to limit the number of occupants that live with the tenant unless the number exceeds a municipal occupancy standard. So you can check with your local municipality about that standard. It's usually about 100 square feet per person.
Okay. So we have a question from one of the attendees. This is about a former tenant. So this person is asking, what are the landlord's responsibilities with respect to mail delivered by Canada Post that is addressed to an ex-tenant? Catherine or Ashley?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. I mean, obviously I'm a licensed paralegal, so I'm not familiar with everything under the criminal code, but I do know it's a criminal offense to tamper with somebody's mail. You should, have this person's contact information. I would let them know that they have mail at the house. If they're not coming to collect it, then my recommendation would be return to sender.
Thank you, Catherine. Somebody else is asking, is membership required to view the sample rental application? I can take this one. So you can purchase it. We sell the form is $1. We can send it to you by mail or by email, or you can come to the office to pick up a copy of the rental application. Okay, so another attendee is asking, what do landlords do if the city of Brampton is complaining about number of tenants, but landlords cannot do anything about it because it infringes on tenants' rights and the landlord cannot dictate how many guests they have and how long they can stay? Maybe Ashley, would you like to answer?
Yeah, so that's like a very specific question where there's probably going to be nuances. So you should definitely reach out for independent legal advice. But generally, if the city is involved, then you may want to look into, like we mentioned earlier, the overcrowding aspect to see if it is overcrowding. If it's not, then it may also be an interference issue where if the city is threatening to fine the landlord or there's issues around that, an N5, which is a notice for eviction for interference, damages, or overcrowding, may be applicable. So there may be options there. You should definitely seek independent legal advice.
And that's definitely a good opportunity to remind everyone that we're going to be providing a webinar on understanding the N5. So maybe attend that webinar.
Yes.
Somebody else is asking, what do we do if the tenant refuses to pay even a legal rent increase after 12 months of residency? What options are available? So that's not related to this webinar. So Catherine, would you like to give a general answer?
Yeah, anytime there's a discrepancy of non-payment of rent, it's followed with an N4. But again, it's not part of this webinar. Feel free to call our office. We can discuss your particular situation in more details.
Yeah, we'll be open tomorrow at 9 a.m. So you can call our office in order to ask your question. Okay, so somebody else is asking, can you specify the maximum allowed number of occupants for the unit? Ashley, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so there's no maximum or minimum number allowed. It's going to depend on the square footage and what constitutes overcrowding as per the bylaw.
And that's every city changes, right?
Every municipality will be different. You can contact them directly. They'll have that information for you.
Okay, somebody else is asking, do I use a standard lease form if I'm renting out a room in a house with shared kitchen, bathroom with a landlord's immediate family? Catherine, would you like to answer that?
Yes. Um, Again, without asking more questions, because this is personal to your situation, it sounds like what you're saying is that you have an exemption under the Residential Tenancies Act. Anytime there's an exemption, I do not recommend using the standard form of lease because it's designed specifically with clauses that are included in the Residential Tenancies Act. So at that point, I would, draft your own agreement explicitly stating that the RTA does not apply.
Yeah, and we would have to find out if the landlord is the property owner, right, under the exemption. But we encourage the landlord or the person asking the question to call our office because there's always follow-up questions in order to clarify the situation. Somebody else is asking, can a tenant indicate no pets on a rental application, but on move-in date shows up with pets and admits in writing of lying on the application? Is this not impending on a business decision for suitability of a rental complex? Ashley, would you like to answer that, please?
Sure. So Unfortunately, that there wouldn't be any kind of remedy to that unless the pet was causing issues like in terms of damages or interference. The Residential Tenancies Act is quite clear that no pet provisions are not enforceable, so you wouldn't be able to really enforce anything around that. That's why screening and verifying references is so important and why we are really encouraging that.
So maybe as part of the rental application, the landlord can ask, do you have a pet? And just keep it simple. Ask a question and see if the tenant answers, and based on that, you can make your decision.
Absolutely.
Okay, so somebody else is asking for rent increases. I know the RTA says that it will be increased after 12 months, but can I send out the increase letter 60 days before? This is not related to the webinar, but it was mentioned how often you can increase the rent. So maybe Catherine, can you answer that, please?
So actually, this is a good question because I didn't discuss it in my portion, but whenever you send out a rent increase, that does have to be provided to the tenant 90 days before,
And
not
yeah,
60. Yeah.
it may be with a landlord and tenant board form, but for more information, you're welcome to call our office. What about access to the unit to do a repair? Think that will be answered in our upcoming webinar where we discuss beginning a tenancy. But yeah, you're welcome to call our office as well. Can a landlord ask applicants to provide a credit report at their own cost? Ashley, can you answer that, please?
So yes, however, if you're asking the tenant to provide their own report, you would need to again be aware of any fraudulent issues with them. If you're not getting the report directly yourself, then it could be an issue. You would need to make sure that you're verifying the information and that you know what to look for in terms of fraud.
Yeah, and service like Equifax, I believe it's free of charge. So, the tenant may not have to pay for a credit report. Somebody else is asking, can the tenant wants to include her 13-year-old son on the lease. Is that illegal? Catherine, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so minors should not be included on the lease agreement. They should be what's considered occupants. So that's something, to include on the rental application, but not on the lease agreement. I wouldn't say it's illegal from a criminal standpoint, but certainly as a landlord, I wouldn't be having children sign leases.
Thank you. Somebody else is asking, the insurance company limits often to unrelated families, but in a family, no limit. This is pertaining to the number of occupants or tenants. Your comments. Ashley, would you like to answer that?
I can't really make any comments in terms of what insurance companies may or may not cover. The best people to speak with about that is the insurance company directly.
Yeah, if you have any other information to provide, I think that would be more of a specific situation that we would need you to call our office for. Somebody is asking, can a landlord specify in the lease the maximum number of persons allowed to live in a unit? Catherine, would you like to answer that, please?
Yeah, so no, it wouldn't be considered an enforceable clause if you said, only 2 people are allowed to live in the unit. That's why, tenant screening is so important, making sure that the person who, is moving in and their intention to just move in on their own. But again, if you're, for example, renting to a young woman who goes and finds herself, a significant other and wants to move that person in, as the landlord, you can't say no because only one person's allowed to live here. It's not within your rights or abilities as the landlord.
Thank you. So we have some follow-up questions on the PED situation where the tenant denied on the rental application that he or she had a pet. So the landlord is asking, follow up to my previous question, can a tenant indicate no pets on the rental application? Yes, so is this not a violation of human rights and for other prospective tenants? I think, Catherine, did you answer that before?
I can add a comment to it. Again, because of the clauses in the RTA that explicitly state tenants are allowed to have pets, it's a very difficult thing. If you have current tenants in your building that are suffering from pet allergies or other reasons why pets really are not well suited for your building, this might be a question you could ask a previous landlord reference to confirm that the person moving in doesn't have pets. But again, even if they don't at the time of moving in, once they're in there, if they choose to get a pet, it's up to the landlord to be able to prove that that pet is interfering with others or causing damage in order to have the pet removed from the unit.
Thank you. Somebody else is asking, is making a false statement on an application grounds for lease termination? Ashley, can you answer that, please?
Yeah, so the short answer is no. The Residential Tenancies Act sets out the reasons to end a tenancy. I described them a little bit earlier. That wouldn't necessarily be one of the reasons. The longer answer is if you have a specific scenario of a specific fraudulent admission on an application, you should definitely seek independent legal advice. You can give us a call tomorrow. I'd be happy to discuss this further.
Thank you. Somebody else is asking, in a small multifamily 2 to 4 units, who's responsible for bringing garbage, organics, recycling to the curb? Can the additional term specify responsibility to the tenant? So this is definitely pertaining to our upcoming webinar. So either call us tomorrow or wait until we provide that webinar, please. Somebody is asking for the presentation slides for references. Yeah, we can make them available. As soon as we have the recording available as well, we can provide the links that we mentioned in the slides. Somebody else is asking, how is a tenant screening important if the tenant lies on an application? Ashley, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so the importance of the screening is not only to get the application filled out, it's to verify it, which is why calling those references, cross-checking the references, all of that is important. So just getting the application alone isn't really enough. Obviously, anyone can put anything on whatever they like. It's the verification part that's really crucial. So if you're a landlord beginning a tenancy, you get a rental application, it's important to do your due diligence and sort of make sure that you're cross-checking all of the information that they've provided you and that it is correct before you sign that lease and begin the tenancy.
Thank you. Somebody's asking how to get a hold of Ashley. So it's not just Ashley, it can be Catherine, any other member of our staff. They're all licensed paralegals. They're all very knowledgeable. They know and they can help you. So yeah, we can either call and ask for Ashley, or you can just talk to whoever picks up the phone. So we have one last question. Can landlord require a tenant to have insurance? And if the tenant stops that insurance, is it grounds to terminate the lease? I think this is more about related to the upcoming webinar as well. Definitely, it's a great question, just like the others that we couldn't answer today, but they're related to a different topic. Is there any general comments that maybe Catherine can make about this?
No, I think we're definitely going to do a deep dive into what can be a part of the standard form of lease in our next presentation. Insurance is actually an option there. So join us in June for that presentation.
Or call if they don't want to wait until June. So somebody else added another question. We're getting to 2 p.m., which is our our ending time, but I'll read this question. When checking references, is it okay to ask previous landlords about the applicant's pet status, family status, etc., to corroborate what's on the application? Ashley, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so you can definitely ask about pets and rent receipts. I wouldn't ask any question that has to do with the protected grounds listed under the Ontario Human Rights Code. So I wouldn't be asking about family status, race, anything that could be a protected ground you're not going to want to discuss or ask or talk about because that may influence your decision, and that would be against the Human Rights Code.
I guess I can add, let's remember tenants are humans and their situations will always change. They may come in as a single person, but then they will, meet someone, form a family. It could be a pet or it could be with children, who knows? But it's a changing situation. It's not going to stay the same way. And that's how it is in the province of Ontario, right? It's not a reason to end someone's tenancy over getting married or moving in together, whatnot. So I don't see any more questions, and we have 2 minutes left. So I guess we'll we'll wrap up here. Any last comments from Ashley and Catherine?
No, just thank you for joining us today. And if you'd like to do the survey on your screen, you can. I believe an email will also be sent out afterwards with the survey as well, if that's easier for you. But we'd appreciate your feedback so we can make these sessions better when we continue our series in June.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, everyone, for attending. If we were not able to answer your questions today, yeah, we'll encourage you to call tomorrow or and definitely attend our upcoming webinars. Catherine, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just also thanking everyone for attending. We thoroughly enjoy putting on these presentations, and I hope everyone can join us for the one in June.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank
Bye.
you.